Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This is all about Disas, and many people think these are difficult to grow. I would say they're different rather than difficult. And with a few basics, these are not difficult, but they are quite different to most of the other orchids you would have. First of all, they're terrestrials. In some cases, you could sort of say they're epiphytes because they're often found in rocky areas, but they grow on the ground. That's the main thing to consider. Now, this is Disa cuensis, all of it. And I started off with, I bought a little pot like that with a few plants in. And by the end of that year, it had lots of plants. And I took them out of the pot and split them up into some large ones, some medium ones, and some smaller ones. So whereas I bought one pot with a few plants in, by the end of the year I had 3 potfuls. They do propagate themselves underground freely, yeah? So you can expect where you had a few, you end up with lots. So find some friends that like Disas, or you're just going to end up with a shed full of the flipping things. Obviously, if they're not doing too well, that won't happen. So starting off, where do they come from? They come from South Africa, in and around and on Table Mountain. They are cool growers by nature, yeah. So and they're often in quite exposed areas, but the real thing to consider is where they actually grow. Their roots are often in running water. They actually grow on the edges of seepages and water runoff, sort of down cliff faces and things like that. Yeah, so they grow with their feet in water. And at some periods during the year, the whole plant is underwater. You know, when there's excessive water runoff sort of thing. So these are bog plants at the very least. But that's the most important thing with Disas. Their feet need to stay wet and must never dry out. Yeah. Now, these are often grown standing in trays of water during the growing season. Yeah, that wet. And then the trays of water are kept topped up. Absolutely imperative that pure water is used. Yeah, so rainwater at the very least. Obviously, I use RO water, so yeah, but yeah, you start getting tap water near these, they're just going to keel over. They like pure water. So again, back to where they grow. The water that they're in and around, yeah, has just come down off the top of the mountain. It's cold water, yeah. It hasn't had a chance to heat up. And for an amount of the year, it's actually melted snow. It's that cold, yeah. So cold water, yeah, that's quite important. So that's the watering side of things. What they grow in, there's a Disa nursery, Dave Parkinson Orchids in the UK. That's, as far as I know, all he ever grows, although he's got lots of other plants and very into his wildlife at the nursery, yeah. So nesting birds, he gets frogs, newts, toads, grass snakes. He's very into his wildlife, but not too long ago, a few years ago, he had a stroke and knocked the whole business down, basically. He had some show commitments that year that his family carried on with, but I don't believe he goes to shows anymore. His website remained static for a very long time, but I have noticed there is now a news update for May 2019. That's the first update I've seen for a long time. So maybe he's coming back up and running again. But he's a little awkward to do business with because no cards, no electronic payments, nothing like that. It's all bank transfers and checks. But on the website is a phone number. He's happy to take phone calls and discuss things. But if you buy from him, you know, you will have to sort of fill in his form or write him a letter or give him a ring and sort out what it's going to cost you. And obviously Disas are only posted in spring and autumn. He doesn't post in the summer or winter. So you know, you place your orders accordingly. Right, so that's the where and the what. The other thing that's a bit of a nuisance, but these grow best in a peat mix, not a peat substitute, not potting compost, peat. And we all know the ecology that goes with the extraction of peat and how those environments have become very scarce and are now protected. But he openly states on his website, Dave Parkinson, that if he loses access to true peat, his nursery may fold. It's that important. He's tried other things, but they just don't work as well. Now, there's various mixes, but the basic mix is peat and perlite. Perlite's obviously for the extra drainage and things like that, but it needs to be peat. The guy at the Orchid Society that grows a lot of these and grows them very well, he adds finely chopped up sphagnum moss to his mix. I got my very coarse grade peat from Hampshire Carnivorous Plants. I actually paid a visit there and had a look at all their wonderful carnivorous plants, but the purpose was to buy some peat. I did actually buy some pinguiculars while I was there. Didn't know he had any, but I found some anyway. So that's what they need to be potted in. Potting these, some will say autumn, some will say leave it till spring. You've got your choices there. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. But basically these also grow differently to most other orchids you will come across, because they have at the base of the plant a little stolon. Looks a bit like a tuber, that sort of growth at the base of the plant. Yeah. When the plant's large enough, it will bloom. Yeah. Once it blooms, that plant will die. Yeah. But either during or after blooming, it grows little plantlets all around the base of the new plant. Might only grow one. Yeah. So if you repot in autumn, you've got to treat these roots as carefully as I can possibly stress. They are so fragile and susceptible to all sorts of damage, even with your fingers. So it's recommended that you wash the roots off in water. Yeah, just keep swirling them and gently shaking them until all the old media comes off. And it's not imperative that every bit of it comes off. Yeah. So at that point you can see the little plants, and they can carefully be teased away from the mother plant and potted up separately. And when you pot those little youngsters up, absolute care. Basically you hold the little plant delicately. Yeah. Even holding the plants can damage them. They are fragile. And then you just tease the media down around the roots and don't press it down. Just tap the pot and settle it gently. That's all they need. There's no firm potting or any pressure involved. Yeah, and then they will grow on. Some may bloom the next year. Some may take a couple of years. It depends on the variety. Okay, so that's potting them up. But do bear in mind, once a plant has bloomed, it will die. Yeah, and it's important to get rid of any dead material in your pot, as these are susceptible to a bit of fungal rot, which is normally due to lack of air movement, quite honestly, rather than the dead material, but you know, overkill. So any dead leaves or anything, just trim them off with a sharp pair of scissors. Don't tug at the plant and disturb it. But try and keep your top of your pots nice and clean with no dead material. Yeah, they can occasionally get bugs, although I think I've had a couple of mealy bugs on a new growth once, but nothing much. They've never had scale or anything like that. They're okay on the bug front. But if you get bugs or any form of fungal rots or anything, treat accordingly. You know, so that's that. So we've done potting media, time of year to repot and split. Yeah, if you want to grow a big sort of specimen version, it pays to get one of the strongest young growths you can and put it in a pot on its own and grow it on. Yeah, and then as it progresses, you might want to move it to a slightly bigger pot. The guy that grows them at the Orchid Society recommends deep pots rather than wide, shallow pots. Yeah, so more like this. Yeah, deeper rather than wide, but that was the only one of those I had. That was probably the one I bought it in. No, it wasn't. That was the one I bought it in. Still got the label on. Yeah. So that's that. They like to grow cool with good air movement and reasonable humidity. They're not a high humidity lover, but reasonable humidity. Doesn't have to be excessively high. If you've got excessively high, that's when you're liable to get the fungal infections, because that's in the outside world, that doesn't happen very often, that sort of level of humidity. I mean, when I came in here this morning, it was at 98%. Now, that doesn't normally happen in the outside world. It happens in enclosed spaces when you forget to open the door when you go to bed. Yeah, so that's that. Light levels, good light year round. Now, in the UK, once all signs of frosts and temperatures below sort of 7 or 8 degrees at night are gone, these can go outside. They'll happily live outside, standing in a tray of rainwater and getting rained on and all that sort of stuff. They will take some sun, but early morning sun is best. Midday sun in the UK really needs to be avoided. That's probably pushing your luck. Your leaves will go all yellow, and you might even lose some plants. And you don't need to do it. That's the thing. Even though they might grow in exposed places, we're not in South Africa in the UK, and we haven't got the thinner air by being up a mountainside and the cooler temperatures, if you see what I mean. So you need to go steady with the sunlight. They need protection from those lower temperatures. Some people grow these in cold frames, so they stay outside in the UK permanently, and they're covered up with fleece to keep them a little bit cosier when we get the really cold weather. I grow mine in here year round, and they're growing and they're blooming, so they will take variable environments. But the most important thing is that they never dry out, and they need a peat-based compost mix. Yeah, I think those two things are of primary importance. Don't let them dry out. Use pure water. Well, that really goes for all orchids. Better off to start that. Now, as far as feeding these is concerned, never overfeed these. Very low levels of feed. Dave Parkinson recommends a kick of nitrogen in the spring to get them going. He also recommends using seaweed extract, and the feed needs to go in the tray, not in the pot, and let it soak up. Don't pour it in the pot. Yeah. Again, I would imagine these things have evolved with years of practice running a nursery, mainly growing Disas. So if that's what the guy says, I'm okay with that. Mine get very light levels of the MSU formula, and they get basically whatever I was feeding the other plants with, watered right down in the tray now and again. Dave Parkinson also recommends a bit of a kick in the autumn to help ripen those stolons, on the new growths. There's not a lot of point in ripening off the stolons at the base of the plant where it's bloomed, because they're going to die. They need repotting reasonably frequently, especially if you've got some plants in a pot that have bloomed, like here and here, because when that plant dies back, the stolon at the base of the plant will probably rot, and that can set off all sorts of things in the pot with the others. Yeah, so if you've got any Disas where one has bloomed, maybe not all of them, it's probably better to repot that one, repot those plants, and get that old plant that's going to die out of the pot. So that might all sound complicated and too much trouble, but apart from getting hold of the peat in the first place and actually finding some Disas, they're not that easy to get hold of in the UK, but Dave Parkinson has a wonderful selection with all sorts of colours and sizes, so lots to choose from. Those are the basic rules. It needs a peat mix, unfortunately, and that's difficult to come by for ethical reasons, which I am all for. But like the guy says, if he loses peat, he may lose a large part of his collection because he's yet to find a substitute that works anywhere near as well. Yeah, get a good amount of perlite in there, and some say add some chopped moss. Some say you can grow these in moss. I haven't tried it. I've stuck to the rules as per the Disa nursery and the guy at the Orchid Society that grows lots of these and grows them well. You know, prizes in shows and all that sort of stuff. So there we go, that's Disas. All the plants look very similar. Yeah, they've all got like a rosette of leaves of varying sizes. Some of the plants can be quite large and some are minuscule, you know, real miniatures. There are species Disas that become available now and again. I don't know how many species there are in the genus, but it won't be lots. Yeah, and some of the species have the tiniest of blooms on. Interesting but tiny, I think is the expression. So that's sort of Disas. Must stay wet, need peat, good light, avoid strong sun, especially through glass. Can be grown outside, you know, when the nights don't get too cold. Obviously they need shelter once we start heading into autumn again. And once bloomed, that bit of the plant's going to die back. But as it's blooming, it should be starting to produce the new growths around the base. Those new growths can be taken off, potted up separately, and in a few years they'll bloom. Some take a while to bloom, but a lot of them will bloom. If you say like the new growths growing halfway through year one and are ready to repot at the end of year one, they'll grow on through year two and probably bloom in year three. So those little plants are just over 2 years old at the time they would bloom. So you don't have to wait for ages. And colours, bordering on pure white, but I don't think I've ever seen an absolute pure white one. They've usually got tinges, and then they set off through the pale pinks into the deeper pinks to almost purple, and they head off in the other direction through the pale yellows into the bright yellows, into oranges and into reds. And some of the colours are incredibly vibrant. They all have this shape, yeah? Even the species that have got very thin petals, sepals, whatever these bits are, because it's difficult to work out, they're still that basic shape, yeah? 2 dominant pieces followed by a hood and some stuff in the middle. And excuse my very technical description, but I've never looked up the anatomy of a Disa to find out which bit is what. So there we go. That's Disas. I plan on getting more because I want more colours. And hopefully that's going to happen. Burnham's have got their orchid fair coming up in July, which is like a Saturday and a Sunday. And I've got a personal invite to the Saturday evening do with drinkies, which is really good because I've then got to turn around and drive home, haven't I? But yeah, they've got like an open fair. There'll be a couple of orchid societies putting on displays, and I think there's some talks going on, you know, just a get together over the Saturday and Sunday. I'll be going on the Saturday simply because I've been invited to the evening do. I got a personal invite at Malvern, so I will attend that as I was asked. I might even have to buy an orchid just to be polite. But there's a lady there that I met last year that grows Disas that hopefully is going to bring some along, which would be good because I would like to get some more colours. If that doesn't actually take place, I may try and do business with Dave Parkinson this autumn because I've missed the spring, and you know, buy a couple from him and see where I go with those. The guy at the Orchid Society that grows lots of these has got many of his plants from Dave Parkinson. So obviously, you know, they do transport okay. And apparently he's a great guy. I have met him once. The first year I went to Malvern, I walked inside the marquee, and one of the biggest displays at that show was Dave Parkinson's Disas. And I just stood there with my mouth open. I'd never seen a Disa before. And that mass display of all of those colours, you know, on these nice bright green leaves, I was just amazed. I'd never heard of them. I'd never seen one before. And I wouldn't dare buy something like that, even in those days. So, anyway, That's Disas. Don't be frightened of them. Just be aware that they are quite different to the other orchids you may have. And if you do get some, for hell's sake, don't let them dry out. I don't stand mine in water, except for when I water them. When I actually fill these trays right up, and then I come back a few hours later and see how much it's gone down. And sometimes it's all gone, all up in the pot, in which case I'll fill them up again, yeah, or top them up, whatever. And then I just pick them up. That's quite heavy, that's wet through. That's very heavy. And so's that. So these don't need watering. It's one of the few orchids I can go by weight because of what it's potted in. When it's wet, it's heavy. Yeah. Okay, that's Disas then. That was a request from somebody on Facebook, and there's no way I could have done that lot in a comment, so I said I'll make a video. And this are it. So see you next time. Bye for now.